Immediately, I judged. And immediately, I was in a negative syndrome, damaging myself and thinking bad thoughts about service station men in general. I noticed the contagion effect would cause this to actually affect all service station men in the world. So I told everybody we've been cheated. I even instructed my employees, we will not patronize that service station anymore. I thought I had won the contest. Then one day as I was driving in from the ranch, and by the way, when I come in from the ranch, I have to pass this service station every time. I noticed I didn't even want to look at it. I looked across the street. I realized there's a negative syndrome. I have to face it every day. And then the thought came to me, what would happen if you did this with all the businesses all the way into town? Could ruin my day. And then the truth of the diagram that I teach came to my mind, and I realized that everything is really wonderful, everything is really good. Now, by choice, just an act of will, I decided that this particular service station man had done a wonderful thing for my wife. Now, she has to drive a long road alone, without houses, and what would he do if he really wanted to protect her? Oh, by the way, one of the most interesting things on this particular situation, when I looked at the bill a little closer, I found out that he'd sold her a new tube, and I knew that we had tubeless tires. And then I got to thinking, if you tried to fix a tubeless tire, and you weren't quite sure whether you got it fixed or not, what would be the safety thing to do if you wanted to protect a woman? Obviously, after you fix the tubeless tire, go one step further and put a tube in it. Wasn't this a wonderful man to help my wife when I wasn't there? So I told everybody, this is a wonderful service station. Everybody patronize this station, so everybody starts buying gas there. You know, I noticed that it wasn't over 2 weeks until my decision that this was a good service station was confirmed over and over. In fact, one time the man that owned the station fixed actually a repair on one of the vehicles that I own and never even made a charge. And one other time he called attention to something that was going to break, which saved us considerable money. And since then I have found over the years that this particular owner of this service station wouldn't do one thing wrong to actually hurt anyone, and his only goal is to serve people. Now when I drive by this station, I get a warm feeling because I'm in a positive aura. Now I use this illustration for one purpose. Does this prove that every story has two sides? A negative and a positive. And you choose which side you want. If you look at one side of it, you suffer and you destroy yourself. And if you look at it the other way, you become happy and full of life. And the choice is up to you entirely. There's only one real side. Negativism disappears so fast, nobody knows where it goes. I happen to know that Napoleon was as bad as Hitler. I also happen to know that Jesse James was a pretty bad guy. I knew he would shoot women or children. I also happen to know in our society today that Napoleon is not bad. I happen to also know that Jesse James is a hero. I also know 75 years from now we'll worship Hitler too. What's time doing with bad? Think of any political figure. As long as he's alive, boy, there are people saying this about him, this about him, this about him. Let him die. What happens to everything bad? Tell me where it goes. Anybody know where it goes? Disappears. Everything below the line is nothing. It doesn't exist. Well, for example, the first thing in the positive aura is acknowledgement, is it not? The opposite of acknowledgement is indifference, right? Now, the minute I am just a fraction over the line, am I in acknowledgement? All right, now, the minute I am just a fraction under the line, am I in indifference? Now, where's the whole negative area? Isn't it gone? I only need one microscopic point below the line to include the indifference. Let's plot it a different way. Is affection infinite? Can I plot a finite factor on an infinite diagram? In other words, if affection is infinite and I wanted to plot indifference below the line, could I even so much as put one dot? In other words, if from the x-axis up I've gone into infinity, can I put anything below the line now? Then there's nothing to it. Now, the sooner you realize that you are not going to accept what Eve died for, which is knowledge of good and evil, which is just simply pride. Don't you want to be somebody? Don't you want to know something? Don't you just dread the fact of being taken advantage of? Isn't it awful to be naive? But yet the Pollyanna who goes to the top, is he naive? Could you take advantage of him? I'm so pleased, though, that the Creator has protected the Pollyanna. He has put a law into effect that if you believe somebody's good, they have to be good in spite of themselves. Now, this brings me to another story that happened not too long ago in our city, and I think this will give us some real food for thought. This minister called me up and related the story and said I might be able to use it in my seminars. He thought this related some of the truth that we're trying to teach. He was calling on a lady, one of the members of his parish, who was extremely negative. In the process of talking to her, she told him this story. She said she went to the door, and there was a man there who was blind, who was selling brooms and mops. So she purchased a broom from him. She handed him a $5 bill. He put the $5 bill in his pocket, and he counted out the change. And he gave her 4 $1 bills. She looked, and sure enough, there were 4 $1 bills. And then she asked him this question: "How did you know I'd give you a $5 bill?" She says, "How did you know I didn't give you a $1 bill?" He smiled, and he said, "No," he says, "you gave me a $5 bill." She says, "Are you sure?" He always says, "I bet my life on it." He says, "I know." She said, "I don't see how you can be sure." He says, "Oh, I have a system." She became real curious. She says, tell me your system. Do they feel different?" "Oh, no," he says, $1 bills and $5 bills all feel the same. The difference is there's a law that says that nobody can cheat a blind man." She says, "What do you mean?" "Well," he says, "I've been selling mops and brooms for 27 years. Every night I come home and my wife counts out the 5s, the 10s, the 1s, and not once in 27 years has anyone cheated me." He looked at her in all of her negativism. She was amazed. He said, "This is the law." He says, "You can't cheat a blind man." He says, "When I ask you what this bill says," he says, "you have to tell me the truth." She told this to the minister, and the minister called me up, and he said, "I've learned a great lesson. From now on, I'm a blind man." There's a law here. What you believe has to happen. Now, if you believe tonight that your house is going to be broken into and they're going to steal, and you do not have a corresponding belief that the locks are going to hold, and that someone's going to spot whoever's going to do it, what can I guarantee you will happen to your house? It will be broken into and people will steal. Now, if you're going to believe that people steal, should you believe in locks? Now, I'll show you an experiment. When I was teaching at Fresno State, one of the men on the faculty taught criminology. And we were having a little discussion one evening, and he was making fun of these ladies who were depending on their front door locks. So he asked one of the ladies, he says, "You got a bobby pin?" She said, "Yes, here's a bobby pin." So he went down the block and opened all the front doors. These big fancy locks, and he takes his bobby pin, goes right through that one, the next one. All right, now what we had done, now watch this, we had destroyed the faith of these housewives in the locks, right? Did they still have the belief that people stole? Within 6 months, 3 houses on that block were broken into and stuff was stolen. Now, if you are going to believe that the world's out to get you, what must you put up a corresponding belief for? Big policemen, right? Powerful locks. Eventually, you have to come to the conclusion, can a lock stop a criminal? You don't stop anybody with locks. I shouldn't really tell you that until I also make sure your faith is big enough to believe that nobody can take anything from you. Because if I destroy your faith in your locks first, then I know you're going to be robbed. There's a grocery chain here in town that had over $200,000 stolen from them. And they since have hired detectives to work with the stockmen trying to find out how. By the way, $200,000 of canned goods is several semi-truckloads. They also have the highest rate of bad checks in the Portland area. In my developing subordinates class, I had one of their executives of 5 stores. And he was wondering, what can we do to change our image? I says, nothing. We've got to change the whole name of the firm and start all over because it's embedded in the community what this store stands for. The interesting thing when we were having that seminar, he says, I know what you mean. He told me an interesting thing that happened in one of his stores. They had offered $10 prize money for anyone who caught anybody stealing. This young guy was coming to work and he needed money real bad and he was working on the checkout. And he didn't know that one of the clerks had come over and checked out somebody with a little tiny sack of groceries and then had gone back and started working. In other words, this happened behind his back. And he looked over and he saw this guy going out the door with this little sack of groceries. He says, wait a minute, and he grabbed that loudspeaker thing. Would the man that's going out that door come back and show his sales slip? So the guy humbly walks back in, shows the sales slip, turns around and walks out. You see the image? What's that man feel like the next time he comes in that store? You know, I didn't really steal anything, but I'll bet you I could. You see, you might be surprised tonight to know your morals, no matter how much you believe they're permanent, change constantly all day long. They are with whomever you are. In other words, they agree with the people you are with. Now, I know they don't change radically, but there is a certain area where they change. All right, now we're ready for the second method, which is our 6th D. The best way I know to describe this is if you would go to my ranch tonight and you were to drive back to Portland, you'd be driving down a little tiny road and you would come to a junction and both alternatives would look just about as good as the other. And you would have to make a decision. And a little later on you'd come to another set of forks. And you'd come to many of these. Eventually, you would come to a freeway. Now, did you have to make decisions on the little forks? Now, we call that the process of growing up, the process of becoming mature. The forks represent 2 principles, and you have to learn which principle will be in effect. Now, when you finally get to the freeway, it's real interesting. You cross many crossroads all the way to Portland. Do you give one of them a second's thought? No, you're right to the speed limit, all the way, right straight through. Have you made any decisions on the freeway? Oh, you come right straight into Portland on the freeway without a single decision. Oh, I would think there's at least 30 crossroads where you could have turned off. Now, why did you not make a decision once you arrived on the freeway? And why did you have a hard time at the little Ys, the little forks, prior to the freeway? Well, we say the freeway is full maturity. And when you reach full maturity, how well do you know the principles of life? These other roads are so inconsequential that you don't even think about them. All right, now, when I reach this stage of maturity, do I really have two alternatives anymore? I would challenge you tonight to finally reach a stage of maturity where there's only one thing left in your life, a freeway. And as you go down the freeway, are there any more decisions to make? It's fascinating. Now, if you're still back in the stages of immaturity, which is from the ranch to the freeway, do you come up to each little fork in the road and wrestle? Which way do I go? Now, the only difference is, when I'm on the small road, both alternatives, do they look alike? Now, when I reach maturity on the freeway, do I even call it an alternative? In fact, if you would take these and come in from the ranch, I would think that you wouldn't even think there were crossroads. Yet there are more crossroads on that freeway than there are forks before you arrive at the freeway. Therefore, I'm saying, in maturity, will you go across more sections of decision-making without knowing you've made a decision? Then in the final stages of maturity, what kind of decision-making do you have? Absolutely none. Now, I told you I would solve the problem of decision-making. Did you know we could get this far away from it? Now, this is based on full maturity and what kind of a knowledge of principle? Complete knowledge of principle, and then could there be an alternative? In other words, we have eliminated alternative by full knowledge. Now, once you've mastered this, then you do not even have to worry about making decisions anymore. Now, to illustrate what I mean by actually not having to make a single decision, let's use this illustration of the freeway and how that side roads are not even brought to my attention. And let's actually use the illustration of my daughter. Now, presently, she's 2 months old. She's laying in a crib, and she has no idea that she should actually wear a blouse. And you know, this little girl's going to grow up, and when she's 4 or 5, she will be playing with other children, and she will not have any blouse on. And she will not actually think that there is even a problem, nothing to worry about, no concern. Then there's going to come a great day in her life. She's going to come to a tremendous decision. It's going to dawn upon her that she must be covered. And she will make a decision, and this will be a tremendous thing for her. She will decide she must not go outside the house anymore without a blouse or a dress on. And by the way, this will probably be the biggest decision of a period of even a month for her. Now, let's contrast this with her when she grows a little older. Let's say now she's a teenager. Does she have to make a decision to put a blouse on before she goes outside? No, it don't ever even enter her mind. All right, now, can you compare, as a teenager, the putting on of a blouse to the side roads on the freeway? We say that it becomes second nature, second thought, and no decision is necessary. When I reach this full maturity of decision-making, I have arrived at this because prior in my life I have made mistakes. Now let's go back to the first fork. If I take the wrong fork, all I have done is gone out of my way and delayed myself. I have become lost, and I have come back and found out that's not the right fork. Then the next time I do not take that fork. So we say then, in growing up, I learn the principles by making mistakes until I arrive at a point when I know the principles, and when I know the principles, then it's seemingly to make the little road into a freeway, not physically, but in my head. No, eventually you will become matured, and eventually you will have a body of knowledge, a body of principles, and these will become universal. They will have more of a general application so that in the latter stages of your life you will not encounter anything different. It will appear to be different and the setting will appear to be different, but it will still follow the basic principles that you know. Now, one thing we should add to this, I do not believe that this is possible unless you really learn who your head is. Now let's go back to when we first started tonight. One of the basic reasons for decision making is to please your head. This is the reason you cannot make decisions, because you're trying to please somebody else besides your head. So we say then, if our sole reason for making decisions is to please our head, then should we not learn the principles that our head governs everything by? Then, if you know the principles by which your head operates, then will you be able to make the decisions required of you by the head. That leads me into the third way of solving the problem of decision making. And if you thought the second way was deliriously happy, and it's almost as much contrast between the first and the second as there is between the second and the third. These three ways fascinate me tonight because they all have one thing in common: they're utterly ridiculous. But are they ever beautiful? Right? The third way is to not make any decision at all and pass the decision-making process up to your head. Now, if you follow what I said, number one, everything is good, so we make no negative value judgments and we govern ourselves by philosophy. The second one, I have learned the principles of life until everything is a freeway and no decisions are required because I'm in total submission to my head. And the third one, if anything different ever came up, I would refer it immediately to my head. Now, I know you're not supposed to have anyone else on earth help you make decisions. And we said very clearly at the outset tonight that this damages your self-image. There is one exception. I want to bring it in right now. Anytime I want to, can I let my head make the decision for me? Now, there's only one limitation to this. Does the head want you to mature? Therefore, does he want you to make every decision you possibly can? But every once in a while in the process of growth, if something does come up for which you are not qualified, why not pass the buck to the head? Now, I'd like to give you two beautiful illustrations. Number one, we're going back to King David. One time in his life, he got carried away, and he committed adultery. And then he got all mixed up, and he didn't know what to do, so he committed murder. He was in a pretty bad predicament. And so the verdict came that there were 3 actual measures of correction for him. Now, he was a matured man. He understood the principles governing his life. We say that he had passed step 1, in other words, where everything was good. He had passed step 2, where he was on the freeway, where there was no decisions required. But all at once, they handed him a decision to make, which he couldn't make. Now, did he have a principle to help him pick which one of the 3 corrections he wanted? No. So what do you suppose he did? He told God that you are more merciful than I am. Why don't you make this decision for me? All right, now to show you what our Creator thinks of passing the buck, what did the Creator do? Made the decision for him. By the way, it's interesting too, it showed less mercy than any one of the 3 would have been. Now, does this prove that the Creator is honored anytime you get into a tight situation to pass the buck of decision making to the top? Now let's take an illustration in common, ordinary life. A normal American wife knows enough to wear a blouse in public. And she knows normally what color to wear, doesn't she? And she knows how to match the blouse with her skirt. Are we giving decisions that are made on the freeway? In other words, if you were driving down the freeway, would the fact that she would come out with only a bra on be comparable to a side road of the freeway? Is there any question about the decision to put a blouse on? All right, now let's carry it one step further. Might she turn around to her head and say, honey, is this blouse too sheer to wear with only a half slip? Now, what have I done with the decision? In other words, is this a decision comparable to what King David had? Now, who's she trying to please? Her husband. And has she reached a point where she doesn't know quite what he wants? And she does what with the decision-making process? Passes it to her husband. All right, now how's he feel about this? He says, honey, I would appreciate it if you put on a full slip. Isn't that easy? Is he aggravated or mad because she has passed the decision-making process up the chain of command? Was God mad that King David had passed it up the chain of command? Isn't this wonderful to have a system of freedom tonight? So beautiful that if you're in the chain, you're in your position, you run into something you didn't expect to encounter, should you be frustrated at all? Just turn around to your head. Now, shouldn't you rear your children this way? The minute they run into a slight little problem, shouldn't they be able to come right home and say, Mommy, Daddy, this is the problem. What should I do? Now, most teenagers, would they dare tell the parents? They'll tell anybody else in the world but the parents. Because have the parents taught them that any time you don't know how to make a decision, what should you do? Come to me. What should a husband teach his wife? The minute you don't know quite what to do, who should you see? You're supposed to see the person you're trying to please. All right, now, if you're head of the household tonight, and you come up across a decision, you don't quite know what to do, why go to your wife? Well, this will get close to home. Who should you go to? Your head. Now, this is beautiful because when you go to your wife, as we mentioned when we first began tonight, you're trying to get rid of the responsibility to her, who has a responsibility already anyway. Your head. Because we only can have responsibility if we assume responsibility, because responsibility is always vested in the head. So if you go to your head, are you trying to get rid of responsibility? None whatsoever. So we have now 3 ideal ways to handle the decision-making process, and in all 3 of them, do you really make a decision? Well, in the first one, you make one decision forever, don't you? In the second one, you learn the principle so well that the side roads are of no effect to you. And in the third area, this is anything that comes up. The exception, you pass it on to your head. Now, would you contrast these 3 methods of decision-making with the first 4? When you are the center of your own little world, your universe is often very small. Your horizons never reach an inch beyond yon leafy hedge or rough stone garden wall. But in this little space that you call yours is found a cluttered multitude of things, worn-out opinions, half-truths and petty whims, an idea with weak and wilted wings. It is only when you move your fences back and lift your eyes above this petty whirl, forget the aches and doubts you once possessed, that you view the far horizons of this world. He drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in.